Victory gardens once covered backyards, rooftops, and even city parks. They fed families in tough times, and the vegetables they grew were anything but ordinary. But over time, many quietly disappeared. Let's rediscover them. Mashua. Mashua once sat beside potatoes in Andean gardens, just as common, just as dependable. This peppery tuber grew with little effort, climbing like a vine and flowering beautifully. Its leaves were edible, its roots filling, and its spicy flavor made it stand out. But over time, the taste became too bold for modern palates. People began to prefer milder foods, and Mashua slowly vanished. Its value as a crop was undeniable. It resisted pests naturally and thrived in tough soil. In the right conditions, it could feed a household without fuss. Yet today, most have never even heard of it. Victory garden growers once knew that Mashua could be trusted. It was a crop that didn't ask for much, but gave plenty in return. Maybe it's time we stop overlooking it. Dandelion Greens. Some might call it a weed, but to Depression-era gardeners, dandelion greens were reliable food. These sharp-tasting leaves were rich in vitamins and were one of the first greens to appear after winter. Grandparents picked them fresh before most vegetables were even planted. They boiled, sautéed, or added them raw to early spring meals. They were simple, honest food pulled from front yards and roadside ditches alike. But over time, dandelions were treated as pests instead of produce. Lawn chemicals replaced recipes, and a free food source faded away. Still, the plant never left. It waits in the soil, offering that same burst of nutrition for anyone willing to try. Gardeners of the past didn't just tolerate dandelion greens. They counted on them. Maybe we ought to give them a second look. Samphire. Salty, crisp, and once gathered by the basketful along coastal shores, samphire was a kitchen staple in older kitchens. Known by names like sea bean or sea asparagus, it thrived where little else could grow. In victory gardens near the sea, families would harvest the produce and serve it fresh or preserve it in jars. But as diets changed and coastlines developed, samphire lost its place on the plate. Many forgot it even existed. Today, few recognize its bright green stalks or remember its briny snap. Yet it's still a hardy plant, rich in minerals and perfect for anyone looking to grow something unique. Easy to care for and resilient to harsh conditions, samphire has the kind of grit that helped gardens succeed when resources were low. Forgotten by many, but not by those it once fed. Purslane. Purslane once crept quietly through garden rows and between sidewalk cracks, overlooked but never unwanted. Its juicy leaves were packed with omega-3s and vitamins, making it one of the healthiest greens around. Victory garden families didn't plant it. It simply showed up, and they were glad it did. It thrived in dry soil, needed no care, and could be tossed into soups, stews, or fresh salads. But as gardening became more polished and seed catalogs took over, wild greens like purslane were pushed aside. Today, most gardeners rip it up before they even learn its name. But to the families who grew their own food during hard times, purslane was a quiet gift. Always there, always ready, and maybe, just maybe, still worth keeping. Lamb's quarters. Before supermarkets and salad mixes, people gathered what was already growing. Lamb's quarters was one of those plants. It popped up in gardens and fields without help, offering soft, nutrient-rich leaves that tasted a bit like spinach. It was easy to cook, quick to harvest, and always nearby. Victory gardeners knew not to pull it out. They welcomed it. While others saw a weed, those who lived through hard times saw a dependable green that filled bellies when money didn't stretch far. It could be eaten fresh, sautéed, or canned for later. The plant didn't ask for space or care. It simply arrived when it was needed most. Today, few recognize it, and most pull it out without a second thought. But lamb's quarters never stopped being useful. It just stopped being noticed. Cardoon. To today's gardener, Cardoon might look more decorative than edible, but to families during the Great Depression, this spiny, silver-leafed plant meant survival. It's a cousin of the artichoke, but instead of the flower, people cooked the stalks. Once peeled and boiled, they became soft and flavorful, a bit like celery with depth. Growing Cardoon took patience and care. It wasn't a quick crop, but it gave back richly. Its large size, hardiness, and drought tolerance made it perfect for victory gardens. And for those who knew how to cook it, it was more than just food. It was a rare treat during years when variety was scarce. Over time, Cardoon fell out of favor. Its tough look and long cook time didn't fit modern habits. But in its day, Cardoon was a proud part of the garden. The crimson giant radish. Radishes were a victory garden favorite. They grew fast, added crunch to meals, and didn't need much space. But the crimson giant wasn't just any radish, it was enormous. While most radishes are picked small, this one could grow to the size of a tennis ball without losing its tenderness. That made it perfect for feeding a large family on limited land. It also had a crisp, juicy bite with a hint of heat, ideal for soups, stews, and fresh salads. The crimson giant appeared in many wartime seed catalogs, often celebrated for its quick harvest and generous yield. But as post-war gardens shrank and faster hybrids took over, it faded quietly from view. Still, for families who needed results quickly, this radish earned its place. One seed, one bulb, one more meal on the table. The Macedonian sweet pepper. Sweet peppers weren't always as standardized as they are today. In victory gardens, people grew regional varieties that matched their cooking traditions. One of those was the Macedonian sweet pepper. It was deeply flavorful, with thick walls, rich color, and a mellow heat that worked well fresh or roasted. These peppers were long, often curled, and surprisingly productive even in less than perfect conditions. Families stuffed them with rice, grilled them over open fires, or sliced them raw into sandwiches. They became a staple in immigrant gardens, especially blending Old World flavors with New World resilience. Over time, more commercial hybrids took their place, chosen for shelf life and uniform shape. But the old Macedonian type, that was a garden pepper, a food pepper. It was grown to be eaten, not shipped. And back then, that's what mattered most. The giant tree tomato. This wasn't your average tomato plant. The giant tree tomato stood tall, sometimes over 10 feet high, and produced clusters of large, flavorful fruit all season long. Victory gardeners loved it for its sheer productivity. A single plant could feed a family, delivering dozens of tomatoes without the need for constant replanting. It was staked like a sapling, tended like a vine, and always rewarded patience. Its fruit had that classic tomato flavor, rich and slightly sweet, perfect for sandwiches, sauces, and canning jars lined up in basement shelves. Over time, modern hybrids pushed it out with their compact size and predictable growth. But back then, the giant tree tomato was a marvel. It showed how much food a single seed could give and how a tall, raggedy plant could stand as a quiet symbol of self-reliance. Sorrel. With its lemony tang and soft green leaves, sorrel was one of the first greens to emerge in early spring gardens. Grandparents used it to flavor soups, mix into potato dishes, or eat fresh in salads long before lettuce was ready. It grew fast, needed no attention, and returned year after year like an old friend. In wartime gardens, it offered something rare: zest, a little brightness in a world that often felt gray. Sorrel was also packed with vitamins, especially after a long winter when fresh produce was scarce. Over time, its tart flavor fell out of fashion, replaced by milder greens. But back then, sorrel played its part. It reminded people that the garden wasn't just for survival. It could surprise you too. And sometimes a little bite of something bold made all the difference. Parsnip. Parsnips do not get much attention these days, but during the Great Depression, they were a staple. Sweet and nutty, they tasted even better after the first frost when the cold turned their starches into sugar. Gardeners would leave them in the ground all winter, pulling them up as needed. They were dependable, filling, and surprisingly versatile. Roasted, mashed, or stewed, parsnips added warmth to many meals. Victory gardeners liked them because they stored well, did not ask for much, and grew deep into the soil, pulling up nutrients other plants left behind. You could count on them. Today they have been edged out by flashier vegetables. But if you ask anyone who lived through those lean years, they will tell you that parsnips were more than a side dish. They were a quiet form of comfort when everything else felt uncertain. Salsify. Salsify was once a familiar name in backyard gardens, though few people today would recognize it. Long and pale, with a creamy white root and a mild flavor often compared to oysters, salsify was slow to grow, but worth the wait. Families peeled and boiled it like a potato or sliced it thin into soups. It was filling and gentle on the stomach, a good choice when food was simple and hearty. Victory gardeners appreciated its long storage life and how it kept in root cellars for months. But as tastes shifted and quicker crops became the norm, salsify was quietly dropped. Still, those who remember it often speak of its soft texture and subtle charm. It may have disappeared from the grocery store, but in those hard days, salsify was another quiet helper in the fight to get by. Jerusalem artichoke, also called sunchokes, Jerusalem artichokes grew like weeds, but fed families like gold. They were not artichokes at all, but the knobby tubers of a sunflower-like plant. These roots could be harvested in late fall and even into winter, dug from frozen soil when other food was long gone. They had a nutty, sweet taste and were eaten raw, boiled, or roasted. People loved how easy they were to grow. No pests, no fuss, just plant them and they came back year after year. The problem was storing them. They spoiled fast above ground, so people forgot them as modern refrigeration took over. But when times were hard, Jerusalem artichokes were dependable. They fed families quietly and without complaint. It is hard to find a vegetable that asks so little and gives so much. Rutabaga. Rutabaga was once known as the poor man's food, and during the Great Depression, that was a compliment. It was large, hardy, and easy to grow in poor soil. A single root could stretch a stew, fill a pot, or stand in for potatoes when supplies ran low. Gardeners planted them in the fall and pulled them well into winter. The flavor was earthy, with a hint of sweetness, especially after frost. Back then, it showed up on nearly every family table. But over time, rutabagas were passed over in favor of more glamorous vegetables. Today, they are more likely to be seen in livestock feed than on dinner plates. Still, this was a crop that carried people through lean years. When stomachs growled and money was tight, rutabaga stood tall. It was food you could count on. Walla sweet onion. The Walla sweet onion was prized for its mild flavor and juicy bite. Unlike sharper varieties, this one could be eaten raw without tears. It added a gentle sweetness to sandwiches, potato salads, and garden dishes when sugar was scarce. Victory gardeners loved it because it grew well in cooler climates and matured early. The bulbs were large, golden, and pulled fresh from the soil by early summer. Families would grow them in rows, braid them together, and hang them in cool pantries. But sweet onions like these do not store long. As long storage varieties took over, Walla onions were pushed aside. Still, in those days, it was a luxury that came from the backyard. Growing it meant you did not have to settle for bland food. It made plain meals feel like something special again. Shetland Cabbage. Shetland cabbage might just be one of the oldest surviving varieties of cabbage in Europe, and during hard times its toughness made it valuable. It withstood frost, wind, and poor soil, making it ideal for struggling gardens. Grandparents grew it for its flavor, somewhere between a green and a Brussels sprout. It produced loose, leafy heads that lasted through winter, feeding families when fresh greens were nearly impossible to find. Unlike tight-headed cabbages, this one offered harvest after harvest from the same plant. But as seed companies promoted uniform, compact varieties, the Shetland was forgotten. Today, it is rare to find and even rarer to grow. Yet it once stood firm in backyard plots and kitchen gardens. It reminded gardeners that strength does not always come in a neat little package. Sometimes it grows wild and hearty instead. Heirloom carrots. Carrots were not always orange. During the Victory Garden era, families planted purple, red, yellow, and even white heirloom carrots. These old varieties were flavorful, resilient, and rich in character. Some, like the red elephant, grew massive. Others, like the Afghan purple, brought color to tired winter meals. Unlike today's uniform grocery store carrots, these heirlooms came in all shapes and sizes. Gardeners liked how they thrived in poor soil and stored well through cold months. They were dug in late fall, bundled up in cellars, and used slowly over time. But when mass production demanded uniformity, the rainbow was replaced by orange. Still, for families living through shortages, heirloom carrots offered both variety and nutrition. Each root pulled from the ground reminded them that food could be simple, beautiful, and enough. Kale Daubenton. Before kale became trendy, Kale Daubenton quietly fed families in backyard plots. It did not grow from seed each year. Instead, it was a perennial. Once planted, it kept coming back, season after season, like an old friend. The leaves were tender, not tough, and easy to cook. People harvested it by hand, plucking what they needed without harming the plant. Its staying power made it a Depression-era favorite. Families appreciated how it kept producing without much work. Over time, hybrid kales took over, and Daubenton nearly vanished. Today, only a few gardeners know of it, but those who do treasure its reliability and flavor. In a world where so much has to be replanted and maintained, Kale Daubenton simply stays. It was one of those quiet crops that never made headlines, but always made dinner. Dwarf French beans. Short, tidy, and full of flavor, dwarf French beans were once a common sight in backyard gardens. Their small plants did not need poles or trellises, making them perfect for tight spaces and busy families. They produced quickly and generously, offering tender pods in just a few weeks. During wartime and after, these beans gave families food security in a small footprint. The flavor was rich, the texture perfect, and they preserved well for winter meals. Yet over time, they were replaced by larger commercial varieties. The compact plants fell out of favor even though they were easier to manage and ideal for home gardens. Today, most people have never tasted them. But during hard times, dwarf French beans were a smart, dependable choice. They were a quiet staple in a time when quiet meals mattered most. Runner beans. Runner beans once ruled backyard fences and garden edges. Their tall vines climbed anything, filling space with red flowers and long, plump pods. Families planted them for beauty as much as food. They were dependable, growing fast, and producing a steady crop all season long. These beans were more than vegetables. They were part of the garden's rhythm. Every year, children helped plant the seeds. Later, they picked the pods, shelled the beans, and ate them fresh or dried. But as new hybrids came in, runner beans were gradually forgotten. Seed catalogs stopped featuring them. Still, they remain one of the most reliable crops a family can grow. Easy to start, satisfying to harvest, and beautiful to look at. In the days when every meal had to count, runner beans always earned their place. Americans once leaned on these forgotten veggies to survive the hardest years, and many of them could still help us today. If these forgotten veggies brought back memories or taught you something new, let us know your favorite. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.